so incredibly fortunate to welcome Salley Mavor as our guest speaker this evening. Her talk is a highlight of our summer-long celebration of Woods Hole women artists. Most of you here are familiar with Salley's magical works of art. Trained at the Rhode Island School of Design, Salley has exhibited throughout the country and is the illustrator and author of numerous award-winning books. She also creates art through film using stop-motion animation. I encourage you to visit Salley's We Folk Studio website to learn more about her career and get a peek behind the scenes on how she conjures up her enchanting work. Woods Hole is proud to claim Salley as a native daughter. Her village roots date back a century when her grandfather first began conducting research at the MBL. Salley's parents, Jim and Mary Mavor, were cherished members of the community, as well as the Woods Hole Historical Museum, with Jim serving as a longtime steering committee member. The museum has been so pleased to feature one of Mary's watercolors this summer in our exhibit on Woods Hole women artists. And a quick reminder that after her talk, Salley will be autographing a selection of her books, which are available for sale in the back of the room. And so, without further ado, I'm thrilled to present Salley Mavor.
Thank you, Salley. So we're going to get this. I just wanted to mention, there are at least 3 Salleys in this room, and they're all spelled differently. Oh, it is so fun to be here. And that expression, it takes a village to raise a child, is just, it just fits Woods Hole. And I know there's some of you in this audience who grew up here, and some of you had a summer childhood, some of you had a year-round childhood, but how could you not be affected by spending your formative years in this village? It's affected me in ways that I don't really know how to explain, and so to be able to talk to you is very special. And I'm going to tell you about my art, but a portion of my talk will be about my family's history in Woods Hole. So I went through lots of photographs from the past, and it was really a great exercise. It got me to go through all those photographs, first of all. My dad was a naval architect. He loved boats. I mean, there were thousands of pictures of sailboats. There aren't that many in my talk. So we are going to start with a film that my husband Rob Goldsborough and I made about my art. And it's focuses on my most recent book, which is called My Bed, and it gives you a real background in how to make a children's book, first of all, and how to do it the way I do it. It answers a lot of questions. So we're going to start with that, and then I'm going to start my slide presentation. Okay.
My bed is like peeking into a cozy miniature world with characters, props, and scenery all stitched by hand. With utmost care, the renowned fiber artist Salley Mavor has created a picture book that takes you on an international journey into the homes of children around the world. On each spread, she captures the spirit of a different place and a different way of life in intricate detail. These are no ordinary illustrations. Salley creates her pictures with fabric, beads, and thousands of stitches, creating artwork that brings these children to life while illuminating the universal theme of children sleeping safely in their beds. Let me show you what went into making my bed. Salley Mavor's artwork is indeed unique. She has spent decades experimenting with a needle and thread, developing ways of embroidering wrapping and binding different materials together to create a visual narrative. And it should be noted that every scene and every stitch of the book was done entirely by hand. So I asked Sally where her very unusual personal artistic expression came from.
Even as a young child, drawing with crayons was never enough. I felt that my pictures were not finished until something real was added, either glued or stapled or sewn to the paper. So what I make today and how I do it comes from the same need to find my own way of translating what I imagine into something tangible to share.
In the 1970s, when Sally was an illustration student at the Rhode Island School of Design, she was encouraged to find her own artistic voice outside the two-dimensional mediums common for most illustrators and to create work in 3 dimensions. With this kind of permission from her teachers, she felt free to access her younger self and rediscover the joy of making things with her hands.
For me, it's all about the tactile experience. Holding and manipulating materials in my hands is where the magic happens.
Salley Mavor has built a career in children's books with her own brand of miniature make-believe. Her desire has always been to make art that connects with people in an intimate way. A few years ago, an editor approached Sally about illustrating Rebecca Bond's manuscript for My Bid, thinking that her artwork would be a good match. Because Sally's working methods are so labor-intensive, agreeing to illustrate a new book is a huge commitment. I asked Sally why this book made her say yes.
When I read Rebecca's poem, I imagined scenes jam-packed with patterns and textures, all infused with a warm sense of home. What excited me most was the international aspect of the book.
And then what?
To begin, I studied lots of photos of children and houses and buildings and landscapes from different regions of the world. And using those as reference, I drew simple thumbnail sketches. Then I enlarged the drawings to full size and used those as guidelines for the finished artwork. Even before threading the first needle, I spent a lot of time going over in my head how to make all of the major parts so that they would come together in the end. All of the details and color choices came later as I started constructing the pieces. My favorite material is wool felt because it's sturdy and versatile and the cut edges don't fray. For this book, I also picked unusual fabrics, such as 100-year-old age-stained linen that was passed down from my grandmother. It turned out to be the perfect texture for a Japanese tatami mat. Beads are great for adding a 3-dimensional whimsical touch. With so many to choose from, the selection process was like an audition for bit parts in a play. Besides fabric and thread, I used a lot of wire. I've spent my whole life collecting interesting small treasures, from bits of wood to metal findings. When I see objects with special features that I think will convincingly replicate something in miniature scale, I put them aside, and sometimes they make it into my artwork. I first got to know the children in the book when I painted their faces on wooden beads. As I continued to make their bodies and sew their clothing, I fell in love with them. Then it didn't matter how much time it took to bring them to life and create the places they call home.
Time, yes, time. Each double-page spread for my bed took Sally a month and a half to 2 months to create. After all 18 scenes were completed, they were sent off to be photographed for reproduction in the book. At this point, the publisher's production team took over, overseeing the design, printing, and marketing of the book. Then, the pieces of artwork were returned to Sally to have their next life as an exhibition set to travel to museums across the country. I asked Sally why she thought making art for children's books was so important.
Picture books are children's first introduction to art. And I want to give them something to connect with and care about. Grown-ups call attention to my techniques and perfect little stitches. But children respond directly to the emotional impact of the world I create with those little stitches.
There is something for all of us to experience, young and old, as we travel the world through the pages of this remarkable book.
Okay. Some of you may have recognized Bonnie Simon as the narrator. I'm so happy that she was willing to do that. Now we're going to, I'm going to tell you about my artwork. You got everything set up? That's great. So I'm going to tell you about my life's work, where it came from, how it's evolved, and a little bit about my family's history in Woods Hole. Put simply, a needle is my tool, thread is my medium, and stitches are my marks. I just want to note that my husband Rob took these photographs. I would call him over and say, could you take a close-up? You know, from whatever he was doing, he would come and do that. So thank you, Rob. So I sew on flat surfaces and on three-dimensional objects. I incorporate found objects into my artwork. Some come from nature, and others are man-made. In essence, I create detailed miniature worlds. I use a variety of materials and hand-stitching techniques that I've developed over the past 50 years. Having a storytelling element with characters is important to me. And my overall aim is to breathe life and emotion into embroidery, an art form that is often thought of as purely decorative. What I make ranges from precious, that's a word that a lot of artists are afraid to use, to poignant, to provocative. During my career, I've illustrated several children's books and three-dimensional stitched the three-dimensional stitched illustrations have two lives. They're photographed and printed in books, and the originals are framed and exhibited. This twofold approach allows a wider audience the chance to experience my art, even if they can't see it in person in a gallery setting.
In addition to illustrating children's books, I've written an instructional book about making fairies and other wee folk dolls. I wanted to offer others the kind of how-to book that I would have loved to have found for myself. I've also teamed up with Rob to make stop-motion animations. So, where did this doll-infested needle and thread universe come from? So I was born at the height of the baby boom and grew up in Woods Hole. Until age 6, we were summer people and lived in the cottage that my scientist grandfather built on Barnett Road. Here we are clearing honeysuckle from the fence out front in about 1960. My grandfather, James Mavor Sr., designed and built the cottage when my father was born in 1923. Being thrifty, he used secondhand windows, shutters, and doors, both inside and out, including the mantelpiece and the railing in the loft. My grandfather had a summer lab at the MBL where he did research on the genetic effects of radiation on fruit flies. The rest of the year, he was a biology professor at Union College in Schenectady. He's standing in the top right corner of this 1910 photo of MBL investigators. Behind the cottage, my grandfather built a study where he would go to get away from the family. Every summer, his science library was transported to Woods Hole and back by train. As a child, my father remembered seeing Western Union horse and cart full of book crates pulling up in front of the cottage. Here's my dad, James Jr., with his father and uncle and aunt, Elon and Tony Jessup, in front of the cottage in the mid-1930s. So the Jessups moved to Woods Hole year-round soon after this. My grandmother, Dorothy Jessup Mavor, loved her time in Woods Hole. Here she is with my father in the 1920s. By all accounts, she was a remarkable woman of many talents and abilities. I never got to know her because she died when I was 3. But I feel a connection to her through her paintings. She painted this one of the Do-Re-Mi houses in about 1940. It shows the corner of MBL Street and North Street, where Swope is now. The painting is currently on display in the Woods Hole Library. This watercolor is from a similar vantage point with more of the eel pond and the town dock. I can guess that she was very fond of the Do-Re-Mi houses. She painted this view of the backyard of the cottage before the 1938 hurricane, because that's when the study floated around in the high water. After that, they raised it up and made it into a mini cottage. My dad built a boat of his own design out of plywood when he was a teen. The story goes that Sumner Hilton was very impressed. Years later, he designed and built a sailboat named Vanda. My parents, Mary and Jim Mavor, fell in love folk dancing in Boston and were married in 1950. Anne came first, then me and Jimmy, who is here today. This photo of us was taken in our dinghy at the yacht club by Dottie Crossley. In 1954, Hurricane Carol flooded the backyard of the cottage.
and the main floor of the Littles' house next door was swamped. The shore along Barneck Road was covered with boats and debris. A long building is the Breakwater Hotel, which formerly housed workers for the guano factory on Penzance Point. Boats were everywhere. This is a yacht club on a much calmer day in 1962. It was a central part of our social life in Woods Hole. My dad felt most at home on the water. He would cheerfully do all of the work while the rest of us sat in the cockpit. After spying a mirror dinghy sailing on a lake in England in 1965, my father was smitten and bought a kit to make his own. It was the second one shipped to the US and the first in Woods Hole, which later grew into a fleet. Our number 840 is on display in the museum. Here's my mom knitting at Stony Beach. In the distance is a view of the back of the Breakwater Hotel. There are a lot less trees then. We became year-rounders in 1961, when my father left his job teaching naval architecture to join a team developing a new deep submersible at the Oceanographic. He was hired as Huey's first safety engineer by the director, Paul Fye. My dad's insistence that the project comply with the strictest Navy standards caused delays, which annoyed others on the team, who didn't want to hold up Alvin's launch. During this time, my siblings and I were hardly aware of our father's stress at work, and were busy going to school and playing with our friends. This photo was taken about 20 years ago when a reunion was held for anyone who attended the Woods Hole School. I don't know if any of you went to that. It was a wonderful event. My fourth grade teacher was Emma Barrow. I still run into members of my class around town and have seen 5 of them in the last month. In the early 1960s, an old schooner, the Alice S. Wentworth, was at the town dock. My dad must have thought it was safe enough for a group of us kids to sit on its boom and pose for this picture. Notice, it's wintertime. It's also wintertime here. After switching between our summer cottage and winter rentals for a couple of years, our family moved into a new deck house right next to the water tower. I took this photo from the top of the water tower in the early 1970s, when I was in high school. A friend and I discovered that the door was unlocked and climbed the ladder inside. My parents didn't know about it until I printed the photo in our makeshift darkroom. My mom opened her shop from Far Corners in 1968. The market book shop was next door, and Under the Sun was upstairs. She was in business for close to 20 years, selling imported clothing and gifts. In the early 1970s, my mom and some other women organized the Woods Hole May Festival, which was held every year. A parade went through town and ended at the ballpark. Tom Renshaw's truck always transported a jazz band made up of local musicians. It seemed like the whole village turned up. There was music, games, and dancing. That's my mom in the spotted green dress. Folk dancing was an ever-present part of my parents' life together. Since the 1960s, it was their mission to run the weekly international folk dances and monthly contra dances at the community hall. My dad was an original member of the Woods Hole Folk Orchestra, playing accordion and other instruments. I'm happy to say that folk dancing in Woods Hole is alive and well. The fact that it is still a defining feature of the uniqueness of our community 20 years after my parents have passed on is a testament to their vision and dedication. I took this a few weeks ago. Everybody is smiling. So, bring us up to the present day. So the cottage that my grandfather built 100 years ago in the heart of Woods Hole has been a very special place for generations of friends and family to experience a Woods Hole childhood, including his great-grandchildren, and now his great-great-grandchildren. This fall, there will be some work done on the cottage to ensure that it is in sound condition for the next generation. So don't be alarmed if you see building activity going on. Be assured that it will retain its character and charm. At this point, I'm going to circle back to the question of where my art came from. For sure, it was influenced by growing up in Woods Hole and being raised by parents who lived creative lives, full of art. This is my mom, painting with pastels. And music. My dad wouldn't think twice about bringing his accordion to a secluded beach. And dance. These photos of my parents were taken 50 years apart. It's important to note that all of us were introverts who were either busy making things or staring into space. As a child, I liked to draw, but felt that my pictures were not finished until something real was glued or stapled to the paper. This is my first book, made at age 8 in the Woods Hole School. I remember loving my grandmother's collection of souvenir dolls, which were eventually passed down to me. Doll play was an important part of my childhood, and except for a few self-conscious teenage years, I've managed to set up my life so that I can still play with them. Fast forward to art school, where I had a hard time staying awake during art history class when they showed slide after slide of color field paintings. But when pictures of Alexander Calder's work came on the screen, I woke up. Finally, the kind of art that inspires play and exploration in a way that I could relate to. I was fortunate to have a supportive illustration teacher, Judy Sue Goodwin Sturgis. She's here in the center during a recent visit to my studio. She picked up on my interest in sewing because I frequently brought along handwork to do during the long and boring critiques. And this is a portrait doll I made of her. With Judy Sue's permission, I began solving class assignments with figures and stitched fabric. I stopped struggling to fit within the traditional notions of illustration like drawing and painting. I felt as if I was being set free to become the kind of artist I was meant to be. For my senior thesis, I illustrated Hansel and Gretel with dolls and sets. The real gingerbread house just fit into my apartment oven. By the time I graduated, I started a business making and selling a line of stuffed fabric pins. I made them by the hundreds, sitting at my sewing table with a Singer featherweight. I also made soft sculpture kitchen appliances, like this 9-inch tall refrigerator. The drawers go in and out, and it has Velcro to keep it closed. And I made a series of housewife dolls. So people got a kick out of these, but they were seen as just dolls, not art. Around this time, I discovered 17th century English stump work, which is, I'm gonna move this around so I can face you. It's a form of raised embroidery. I took the stump work concept and devised my own version, making small animals and people which I sewed to a fabric background. I figured that if my work was presented in a frame, hanging on a wall, people would know it was art. I tried out larger figures too. People would ask what my medium was called. I couldn't bring myself to use the homely sounding term stump work, so I named it fabric relief. After about a decade of developing my techniques, I was ready to pursue the idea of illustrating a children's book. I showed my work to an editor in New York, and she suggested I find a story that was suitable for my style. My friend Molly Bang showed me the manuscript of The Way Home, which was written by Judy Richardson, who lives just down the street. Judy and I sold the story to a publisher, and I spent the next year and a half working on the illustrations in the evening after my children were in bed. I took on more book projects, including the classic Mary Had a Little Lamb. Then the fairies started to take over my life. I designed and mass-produced a line of doll kits, which required painting thousands of faces on wooden beads and gathering just the right sized acorn cap to fit them. After 10 years, I knew I had to stop making the fairies or I'd never leave their world to explore new ideas. Now, I had time to work on other projects like my self-portrait, a personal history of fashion. You may have seen it hanging in the Woods Hole Library. It's a spiral timeline of my life from birth to 52, which was my age when I made it. Each figure is dressed in an outfit I would have worn that year. The different fashions were taken from memories, photos, and my imagination. It helped that I remember sewing some of my own clothes. I also started collecting nursery rhymes for a new children's book, an anthology titled Pocket Full of Posies. I selected well-known rhymes like Ring Around the Rosie, This Little Piggy Went to Market, and The Crooked Man. And lesser-known ditties like I'm Dusty Bill from Vinegar Hill, never had a bath and never will. It took 3 years to make over 50 illustrations for the book. Rob made beautiful shadow box frames for all of the artwork. When the book came out, an exhibition of the original framed artwork toured the country for 5 years. After spending all those years on the Posies book, I was ready for something different. I started making larger standalone pieces like Birds of B.B. Woods, which featured a dozen life-size birds commonly found in New England. I referred to photographs of birds to find distinguishing features. I wanted them to be realistic enough to be recognized, but fun to stitch, as well. Birds of B.B. Woods is on display at 8 Cousins Bookshop in Falmouth through Labor Day in their adult store. I went from making a collection of birds to making several collected portraits of people. This one, FaceTime, includes people branching out through time like a family tree of humanity. Whiskers is inspired by Assyrian stone sculptures of bearded men. I used naturally dyed felt, which I purchased years ago from a now defunct cottage industry. So every scrap is precious. For some time, I thought that these little people I make could say so much more. This piece is Cover Up. It portrays women from around the world with different head coverings. The figures all wear some kind of scarf, headpiece, or mask that serve as identifying markers, whether they are examples of historical fashion or dictated by religious and cultural restrictions. Recent exhibitions of my work have included printed enlargements of the portraits. It's become known as the Wall of Women. Favorite selfie spot. Displaced is inspired by current world events, but it could very well represent the universal and timeless plight of refugees throughout history. This is what my studio looked like for months while working on Displaced. The 2016 election sparked a big shift in the direction of my art. Any fairies that were left scattered and went into hiding. I formed a theater company, the Wee Folk Players. The personalities of my dolls changed dramatically, moving out of the fairy house and into the White House. For 6 months, I created and published a new cartoon on my blog every week. As expected, my followers reacted in different ways. They either loved what I was doing or told me to go back to making fairies. Finally, my reaction was, finally people were responding to what my art was saying, instead of commenting about my perfect little stitches. So Rob and I had talked about doing a stop motion animation for years, and now we had a story. We made a satirical takeoff about the election based on the traditional folktale Hansel and Gretel. We spent a year in the basement filming the 13-minute movie. I made the sets and characters and did the animation. And Rob oversaw the lighting, photography, and editing. Liberty and Justice, a cautionary tale in the land of the free, can be viewed on my website or YouTube. Still the same story. After the animation was finished, I resumed work on the book My Bed, which had been put on hold for a year while we filmed the movie. Since the book's publication in 2020, a touring exhibition of the original artwork has traveled around the country. The work is currently on display at the Mariposa Museum in Peterborough, New Hampshire. During the pandemic, I began work on a 4-season series, which is something I've wanted to do for years. For the fall scene, I stitched moss on a stump made of driftwood. I wanted to celebrate the wonder and magic of the natural world. The scenes are populated with little characters who live there. For each season, I took inspiration from what I saw outside, including raspberries growing in my garden. I found some frosted glass beads in my stash, which were the perfect color and texture to make raspberries. I have a lot of supplies and hardly ever buy anything new. Then I wrapped the wire with embroidery floss, winding in several layers, covering the surface until it was smooth. I also observed Baltimore Orioles, which visit our yard every summer. I started with simple sketches, like this one, for the spring scene. The piece grew and evolved during the slow and methodical process. To make moss, I embroidered thousands of French knots on felt that I glued onto driftwood. When all the parts were finished, I sewed them to a stretched fabric background. Each scene in the 4-season series took from 4 to 6 months to complete. All 4 seasons will be included in my upcoming exhibition from September through December at the New England Quilt Museum in Lowell, Mass. I'll conclude with this. So after 50 years of single-minded dedication to making art, I feel a shift taking place. I don't intend to retire, but instead of stitching every spare minute, I'm happy to play with my grandchildren and weed the garden. My wish is to keep making art and inspiring others to find their own way of transforming what they imagine into something real to share. Thank you very much. So this is a time for questions if anybody has any.
I have a question, Sally.
Yes. Oh, hi.
Hey.
Thanks for coming.
I just wondered, with your self-portrait that's at the library, have you ever considered adding to it? I know there's not really room in the way it's framed, but I wondered if you'll ever add a few more.
I don't know, maybe when I'm a really old lady. I can do the last portion. But I feel like it's a set piece, it's done. I did it, I was inspired. And there's so many other things to do. I'm one of those people who I don't have, I have so many ideas, it's just like, there's not enough time. People say, where do you get your ideas? I have no idea. They come, they're constant. And so it takes so long to make things. I have to really, really be know what I'm doing and want to do it. And so the self-portrait was really fun. It was a real turning point, but there are so many more things to do, and I have no idea what they're going to be. But thank you, Maya.
What's
Yes.
been your greatest challenge in the past 50 years of art?
Oh, thank you, Seb. What's been my biggest challenge? Probably our biggest challenge was to be more of a public person when our movie came out, and figuring out how to respond. It wasn't like today, which is quite toxic. I mean, then it was toxic enough back in 2016. But I'm on social media and with my art, but I'm not there in any personal capacity. It's more just for my artwork. That's how I share things. So it actually worked, because people made all kinds of comments, derogatory comments and criticisms, telling me that I was not qualified to have a political opinion, things like that. So I would have time, I read it, I would have time to sort of digest it, and I would never immediately answer. Give it at least half a day, and edit it, and edit it, and edit it, until it is just what I want to say, which is mostly, this is my art, this is what I'm doing, and that was it. So I just sort of stuck with that. I didn't want to try to change anyone's mind. That's not my role. So I'm just explaining what I'm doing. I'm putting it out there. People have their reaction. And it made me feel like I was a real artist now. I'm like, yes, okay. I'm just not this woman who does embroidery. I mean, dealing with that, people's perception of what embroidery is, what fiber art is, what children's books are. I mean, I tell people I'm a children's book illustrator, they have a certain idea in their head of what that is, which is totally different. Or if I say I'm a fiber artist, they might think I make these stringy, blobby things that hang from the ceiling. No, I don't do that kind of stuff. So using these artistic terms is really not accurate. So I just call myself an artist, and I use lots of different materials, and I sew a lot. Yes, Nina.
So, kind of following from this, I'm curious what influence your work has had in sort of developing a three-dimensional or sort of illustration of fabric, say at RISD or anywhere else. I mean, do you have a following now of people who work in the same kind of younger
Okay.
kind of tradition?
Well, I would say that I do have a following, mostly people who sew themselves, a lot of quilters, a lot of people who do crafts. But I think in art schools, I've had an effect too. I speak to art schools, mostly through Zoom, and it's amazing what kind of questions they come up with that are, it just makes me feel like I live such a simple life compared to what young artists today are thinking about. But I like to be an example and to share what I do. I don't teach. I learned very early on that it's not for me. I would sit in a class and I would feel like, okay, I gotta be the teacher and go around and talk to people. And after a while, I was just get exhausted being the introvert I am. And I just wanted to sit like they were and make stuff. I didn't want to have to be the teacher. So that was a realization early on. So what I do is I show things and share things. So the wonderful thing about the internet is that I can do that, and I can still have my own private life and be in control of my life, and I can curate what I put out there. And people do use are inspired by what I do. But I really have no idea the art world is a very strange place. Whatever the art world is. And so I have just sort of, I've lived my life, I've made my stuff, I put it out there, and luckily it's recognized enough so that I get shows and people come to them, and I like to share the joy that I get in making things, and I hope that it comes through. And so that's my goal. Thank you. Yes, Rooster.
So you must have hundreds of framed art, and you just touched on my question. How do you keep track of it all? And it sounds as though the ones you've mentioned are on temporary display. How do you find a home for them in the next, whatever the next step is?
Oh, okay. Well, up until fairly recently, I have sold things, and there's some people in this room who own pieces of mine. And I recently decided to stop that because I have been asked to show my work, and since it takes so long to make this stuff, it would need a decade to make enough pieces to go in a show. So I'm holding on to what I have so it's available to show. But I also borrow pieces from their owners to show. And those people I have a good relationship with, and I feel comfortable borrowing a piece from them. But as far as the future goes, I'm not sure. My kids, my son Ian is here. I don't know what he thinks about what's going to happen when I go. And I have a lot of things, a lot of materials, but I was talking to a friend whose young relatives just cleared out a lot of her stuff that she uses to make things, and without asking her about it. And I'm like, Ian, please do not do that. Because people do not understand. They think, these words, hoarder, come up. And, it's like that Japanese woman who's into having just everything be plain and simple. It's like, not for me. Yes.
Have you found it to be an uphill battle to present your work as art and not as craft? And the reason I ask that
As not as craft.
And I work for Smithsonian American Art Museum, and if your work was shown there, it wouldn't be shown at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. It would be shown at the Renwick Gallery for Crafts.
Yes.
So how have you had to deal with that? And do you consider your work craft, or is it work? Where do you draw that line?
Well, my work is both art and craft. I use craft techniques, but I've always called it art, and I rarely use the word craft. And anything I write about my work, I do not use that word, because it just sort of delegates it to this other category that is not respected as much.
Well, at the museum, there was a saying, millions for art, thousands for craft.
Yes,
And I
yes,
think
yes.
that's the way the art world sort of views.
Yes, right. And so where do I draw the line? I try not to get too caught up in the definitions, and I focus on just making what I do. I'm just making my stuff. And what other people call it, I don't know. But it's interesting, the places that have been willing to show my work, once they see it, when they see the real thing, not a photograph that you send them, the real thing, they put it with the category of art in an art museum. So it's more of a question of just getting it out, having it known, and this battle between craft and art, it's going to be going on forever. It's going to continue forever, especially with women's work and sewing, quilting, anything like that. That's in a whole other category of craft. So it has been a something that I have dealt with, but I choose to just sort of rise above that and just concentrate on making the work. Thank you. Yes?
Are there destinations beyond the New England Film Museum for the current exhibit?
What was the question about
Are
that?
there destinations? for the
After
current
that?
exhibit? Yeah.
There's one schedule, I have a show scheduled in 2027 at the Cahoon Museum in Katuitt. But I haven't been sort of pounding the pavement, so to speak, finding new places. And I'm just sort of, maybe it's part of slowing down and just a change. I've been very ambitious up until quite recently. And I'm less ambitious now, and it's all right. It's okay. I got these beautiful little grandbabies. It's just like, oh, this is what life's about. So it's totally different mindset. So I might not be having as many shows, but if a place wants to come to me and invites me to come, that's great. But it's very, very hard to send out a proposal and get some curator's attention, some museum director's attention. It's so competitive, and my work needs to be seen in person. So most of the places that I show are through like personal connections. Somebody sees it, tells somebody else. It's never about me sending something, an email to somebody and saying, look at what I do. No, it doesn't work that way, for me anyway. Yes?
So when children show interest in your art, how do you introduce it or encourage them or do a little teaching?
Children are different. They get into the world that I create. They're there, and maybe they use that in their own creativity, in their play, but I don't think that they say, oh, I'm going to go and learn how to make this and this and this. You have to be a certain age. You have to be older. When they're young, it just happens naturally. And I don't teach adults, and I don't teach children either. A teacher is a teacher, and I'm an artist. So not all artists are teachers, is what I've figured out. A lot do that to make money because they need to supplement their income. And if you can do both, that's wonderful. But I think I just love seeing the children looking at the original art when they go to the museums and see the show, and they can just look in there. But it really isn't that different from an 8-year-old woman looking at that art. It's sort of this expression on their faces. They're just like, they have this little smile, and they're looking. They're just, it's wonderful to behold. So, thank you very much.